principal's hands wouldn't stop shaking. I watched from my position near the back wall, my 3 sensory stalks rotating slowly to capture every angle of the scene unfolding in front of me. Principal Velgrish, a Corthan administrator who had overseen this educational facility for 23 cycles, was actually trembling. His blue-gray skin had gone pale, almost translucent, and the breathing vents along his neck fluttered erratically. All because of one human girl sitting in the chair across from his desk. Her name was Kira Vance, 16 solar years old when they shipped her off to the war. Now 18, back on station, and apparently enrolled in classes again like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't spent 2 years doing whatever it was humans did in combat zones that made hardened soldiers from a dozen species refuse to talk about it. She sat perfectly still. Not the stillness of calm, mind you. This was different. This was the stillness of a predator deciding whether you were worth the energy to kill. "Miss Vance," Velgrish began, his translator struggling to smooth out the quaver in his voice. "We need to discuss your altercation with student Brecken Morris this morning." Kira's eyes, a shade of green that reminded me of earth forests right before a storm, didn't blink. Altercation. That's a generous word for it. "You broke his arm in 3 places." He grabbed my shoulder from behind. Her voice was flat, mechanical almost. "Bad idea. He was trying to get your attention for a group project. Then he should have used his words." Kira leaned forward slightly, and I swear Velgrish flinched. "Like they teach you in kindergarten." I'd been assigned to shadow Kira for the week, part of my thesis research on human military integration and its effects on adolescent development. Fascinating subject, really. Terrifying, but fascinating. The Galactic Council had started recruiting humans for combat roles 5 years ago, after the disaster at the Playon Rift proved that sometimes you needed soldiers who didn't know when to quit. Humans, as it turned out, were very, very good at not quitting. They were also very good at coming home broken in ways that didn't show up on medical scans. "The medical team says Brecken will need surgery," Velgrish continued, pulling up a holodisplay with trembling fingers. "His parents are demanding your expulsion. The school board wants an investigation. The Galactic Youth Protection Agency is involved now." Kira shrugged. One shoulder, barely a movement. "Okay. Okay? That's all you have to say? What else is there?" She tilted her head, and the gesture was so perfectly predatory that my sensory stalks recoiled involuntarily. I responded to a perceived threat, with appropriate force. "That's what you people trained me to do. 2 years of shoot first, file paperwork later. And now you're shocked that I act like it." Velgrish opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked like a Threxian, sandfish drowning in air. "You're in a school, not a battlefield." Could have fooled me. Kira stood up, and the principal actually pushed his chair back. Same hierarchies, same territorial disputes, same idiots who think touching someone without permission is acceptable. The only difference is here, you pretend to care about rules. She walked toward the door, her movements fluid and controlled in a way that made my research instincts ping with alarm. Every step was calculated, every shift of weight deliberate. This wasn't a teenager walking. This was a weapon being carried. "Miss Vance, you cannot leave until we've resolved this." Kira paused at the door, her hand on the frame. For a moment, I thought she might say something profound, something about trauma or struggle or the cost of war. Instead, she said, "Try and stop me." Then she was gone. Velgrish looked at me, his sensory vents flaring in distress. Did you record that? I gestured affirmatively with 2 of my stalks. Every word. Good. I'm going to need documentation when they try to blame me for whatever happens next. Smart male. He understood what I'd figured out within the first hour of observing Kira Vance. This wasn't going to end well for anyone. I followed her down the corridor, keeping what I hoped was a respectful distance. The other students parted around her like water around a stone, most of them not even consciously realizing they were doing it. Some prey instinct, perhaps. The recognition that something dangerous was moving through their space. Kira walked to her locker, 5th row from the left, 3rd tier up. She punched in the code, grabbed a datapad, and slammed the door with enough force to dent the metal. A Vrexian student, tall and purple-scaled, chose that moment to make a critically poor decision. "Hey, freak!" he called out, his crest rising in what his species considered an aggressive display. "Heard you attacked Brecken. What's wrong? Can't handle being touched? Got issues?" Kira stopped moving. The corridor went quiet. Not the natural quiet of students changing between classes, but the oppressive silence of everyone holding their breath at once. "Thax, maybe don't," someone whispered. Thax, apparently blessed with more confidence than sense, stepped closer. "What, you gonna break my arm too? Think you're tough because you shot some rebels on a nowhere planet? This isn't the front lines, human. This is civilized space." Kira turned slowly, her expression completely neutral. "You should walk away now." "Or what?" Thax puffed out his chest plates. "You gonna assault me in front of 40 witnesses? Pretty sure that's not how your human military trained you to operate." The laugh that came out of Kira's mouth made my sensory stalks curl in on themselves. It wasn't a sound of humor. It was the sound of something breaking inside someone who was already barely holding together. "You want to know how they trained me?" She took a step forward, and Thax, despite his size advantage, took a step back. "They dropped me and 40 other kids on Epsilon 9 with 3 days of supplies and told us to secure a mining facility that rebels had fortified for 6 months. We had 12 rifles, no heavy weapons, and no backup. 28 of us died in the first week." Another step. Thax hit the wall. "Week 2, I learned that Zelthari rebels like to booby-trap their dead. Lost my best friend to a grenade hidden inside a corpse she was checking for intel. Week 3, I learned that some species don't take prisoners. They take trophies. Found out what they do to captured humans. Found out what they did to Marcus and Tilly and Jin." Her voice never rose above conversational level. Somehow, that made it worse. Week 4 through week 96, I learned that the only difference between surviving and dying is how willing you are to do things that would get you locked up in civilized space. She was right in front of him now, her eyes level with his chest. "So yes, Thax, if you touch me without permission, I will break more than your arm, and I will sleep just fine afterward." She walked away. Thax slid down the wall, his scales rattling in fear. I floated after her, my academic curiosity warring with my survival instincts. "Miss Vance, could I ask you some questions for my research?" She glanced at me, those forest storm eyes assessing in a way that made me feel like I'd been scanned by military-grade sensors. "You're the Quilvan scholar following me around." "Yes, Rella Quicks, doctoral candidate studying post-combat integration in adolescent soldiers. Big words for watching broken kids try to pretend they're normal." "That's one way to phrase it, yes." She stopped at a viewing port, staring out at the star field beyond the station. "What do you want to know?" I activated my recording implant. "How do you feel about being back in an educational environment?" "Like a wolf in a pen of sheep." That's concerning imagery. You asked. She pressed her hand against the transparistile, her reflection ghosting over the stars. Every person here is soft. They worry about grades and social status, and whether their scales are the right shade for mating season. Meanwhile, I'm wondering which corridor has the best tactical advantage if someone attacks, how many exits each classroom has, and whether that student over there is reaching for a weapon or just scratching his thorax. I made notes, my stalks trembling slightly. Do you want to hurt them? No. The word came out tired, genuinely exhausted. I want to not care whether they live or die. I want to turn off the part of my brain that's constantly running threat assessments. I want to hear a loud noise without dropping to the floor. She trailed off, her jaw clenching. What do you want, Kira? I want to go back. That shocked me. To the war? At least there, everyone understood the rules. Kill or be killed. Simple, clean. Here, you're supposed to smile and play nice and pretend that everything is fine when nothing is fine, and everyone is just dancing around the fact that you're a weapon they don't know how to unload. A chime rang, signaling the next class period. Kira pushed off from the viewing port and headed toward the education wing. I followed, noting the way other students cleared a path, the way teachers' eyes tracked her movement with obvious concern. Her next class was Galactic History, taught by an elderly Threxian named Professor Millix. He'd been teaching for 40 years, had 2 doctorate degrees, and a reputation for being unable to tolerate disruption in his classroom. This was going to be interesting. Kira took a seat in the back corner. Strategic position, I noted. Wall behind her, clear view of both entrances, close to an emergency exit. She put her datapad on the desk and sat with that same predatory stillness. Professor Millix entered, his scales clicking against the floor in the characteristic gait of his species. He began his lecture on the Treaty of Vexeris without preamble, his voice a dry monotone that had put countless students to sleep over the decades. 15 minutes in, a student named Plix raised one of his appendages. Professor, isn't it true that the treaty only happened because humans threatened to glass the Vexarian homeworld? Millix's eye stalks swiveled disapprovingly. That is a gross oversimplification of complex diplomatic negotiations. But humans did threaten nuclear bombardment. The threat was implied, not explicit, and only after Vexarian forces had committed several war crimes against civilian populations. Plix pressed on, seemingly unaware of the dangerous territory he was entering. Still seems typical of human behavior. Violence as the first solution. I saw Kira's hands curl into fists under the desk. Humanity's approach to conflict resolution is certainly more direct than other species, Millix continued, warming to the topic in a way that suggested he'd given this lecture before. Their evolutionary background as apex predators on a death world has left them with certain unfortunate instincts: aggression, territoriality, a disturbing enthusiasm for combat. Maybe that's why they make good soldiers, another student offered. Too dumb to be scared. Several students laughed. Kira stood up. The laughter died. Something to add, Miss Vance? Millix's tone suggested he already regretted asking. Just wondering, Kira said, her voice carrying that same flat affect from earlier, if any of you brilliant scholars have actually been in combat, since you seem to have strong opinions about it. This is a history class, not a military tactics seminar, Millix replied stiffly. Right. History. Past tense. Things that already happened. She walked toward the front of the room, and I saw several students shrink back in their seats. So let me give you some history that's not in your sanitized textbooks. The Vexarian War didn't end because of diplomacy. It ended because human soldiers, most of them under 20 years old, fought through hell to take the orbital platforms that gave Vexaria strategic superiority. She stopped at the holo display, swiping through images until she found what she was looking for. A photograph appeared, humans in armor, covered in what looked like blood and worse. They were grinning. "This is Delta Company, 3rd Marines, 16-year-old kids who dropped onto Vexaria Station with 60% casualties expected. They took the station in 4 hours, with 83% casualties. The survivors, all 12 of them, held it for 9 days against counterattacks until reinforcements arrived." She swiped again. Another image, a memorial wall. "These are the names of the soldiers who died taking the treaty you're discussing so casually. 647 names. Average age, 17. They didn't threaten to glass anything. They just died, so species like yours could sit in classrooms and call them dumb predators." The room was silent enough to hear the air recyclers humming. Professor Millix cleared his throat. "Miss Vance, while your passion is noted, this is hardly appropriate classroom behavior. Please return to your seat." "Sure." Kira walked back to her desk, but paused halfway. "One more thing, Professor. You called humans too dumb to be scared. My friend Emma Vasquez held a choke point for 6 hours, with a broken leg and a rifle with 3 rounds. She wasn't dumb. She was the smartest person I knew. Got accepted to the Galactic Sciences Academy before the draft. She died because a Vexarian lieutenant wanted to prove a point. So maybe next time you teach history, remember it's not just data. It's people who don't get to sit in rooms like this anymore." She sat down. The class didn't resume for several minutes. After class, I caught up with Kira in the corridor. "That was quite a statement." "Statement. Right." She laughed, that broken sound again. "Won't change anything. Tomorrow, they'll go back to thinking humans are violent barbarians who are useful for fighting, but not much else. And maybe they're right." "Do you believe that?" She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw past the weapon to the exhausted child underneath. "I don't know what I believe anymore. I just know that I'm tired of pretending to fit into a world that doesn't want me, unless there's a war to fight." An alarm blared through the station, cutting off whatever I might have said. Red emergency lights began flashing. A recorded voice, calm but urgent, echoed through the corridors. "Security alert. Armed intruders have breached Sector 7. All students proceed to designated safe zones. Security personnel respond code black." Students began panicking, running in various directions, some screaming, most just frozen in fear. Kira's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The exhausted teenager vanished, replaced by the soldier. Her eyes scanned the corridor, calculating angles and threats. Her body shifted into a combat stance I recognized from military training vids. "How many entrances to Sector 7? She asked, her voice sharp and focused. 3 main, 4 maintenance," I answered automatically. "Weapons lockers. 2 on this level, but they're biometric locked to security personnel." "Not for long." She started moving, no longer walking but flowing through the space with military precision. "Rella, get the students to the safe zones. Now." "What are you going to do?" She flashed a smile that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with violence, barely contained. "What I'm good at." Then she was running, moving faster than should have been possible, disappearing around a corner toward Sector 7. Toward the danger. I activated my emergency beacon and started herding panicked students toward safety. but my recording implant stayed focused on the direction Kira had gone. Because I had a terrible feeling that this was where my research was going to get very, very interesting. Or possibly get me killed. Probably both. The safe zone was chaos wrapped in panic and dipped in bureaucratic failure. 40 students crammed into a space designed for 20, all of them making noise at frequencies that made my sensory stalks ache. Principal Velgrish was attempting to maintain order, but his voice kept cracking every time someone asked about the intruders. Security feeds played on multiple screens, showing armed figures in black armor moving through Sector 7 with disturbing efficiency. Pirates, probably. Or slavers. The Outer Rim stations always had problems with raiders hitting educational facilities. Soft targets, easy hostages, quick credits. Except this time, they'd picked a school with Kira Vance in it. I pulled up my personal recording feed, the one linked to the tracker I'd attached to her jacket during our first interview. Unethical, perhaps, but justified for research purposes. The audio crackled with static from weapons interference, but the visual was clear enough. Kira had made it to the security station in Sector 6. 2 guards lay unconscious, not dead, just sleeping off whatever nerve strike she'd used. She'd accessed their weapons locker using a bypass code that definitely wasn't part of standard student knowledge. Within 30 seconds, she'd armed herself with a pulse rifle, 2 sidearms, and enough ammunition to start a small war. "Should we report this?" whispered Brecken, the Vrexian student with the freshly repaired arm. He was huddled near me, his scales pale with fear. "She's breaking about 15 regulations right now." "She's also the only person on this station who knows what she's doing," I replied, adjusting my recording angle. On screen, Kira moved through the corridors like smoke. She'd switched off the main lights in her section, using emergency backup illumination that cast everything in red shadows. Her movements were precise, calculated. She'd pause at intersections, check angles, advance. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Military training at its finest, and absolutely terrifying to watch in a school hallway. The raider team, 6 of them, had secured the main cafeteria and taken approximately 30 students hostage. Standard procedure. Control a group. Make demands. Negotiate for safe passage and credits. Simple plan. They hadn't counted on Kira. She appeared on the security feed for Sector 7, approaching from an overhead maintenance shaft. The angle gave her a perfect view of the cafeteria below. I watched her assess the situation in seconds. 6 hostiles, all armed. 30 hostages clustered in the center. 2 exits, both guarded. Windows sealed with blast shutters. A no-win scenario by any tactical assessment. Kira grinned. She dropped through a ceiling panel without warning, firing before she hit the ground. 2 raiders went down, non-lethal shots to the legs. She rolled, came up behind a food dispenser, and took out another with a pulse blast that sent him flying into a wall. The remaining 3 opened fire, but Kira was already moving. She flipped a table, grabbed a hostage student, a Quellen girl frozen in terror, and pushed her toward the exit. "Run!" she shouted, her voice carrying over the weapon's fire. "Everyone run, now!" Some students listened. Most were too scared to move. Kira swore in 3 languages, none of them polite. She laid down suppressing fire while physically hauling students toward the emergency exits. A raider tried to grab a young Threxian boy as a shield. Kira shot the weapon out of his hand, then kicked him hard enough to crack his armor plating. "Anyone else want to play?" she called out, reloading without looking. "Because I've got all day. And honestly, I've been looking for an excuse." The leader of the raiders, a scarred Corventian with cybernetic enhancements, stepped forward. He held his weapon loosely, confidently. You military girl? Recently discharged. Why? Professional courtesy. Walk away, let us finish our job. Nobody else gets hurt. Kira tilted her head, considering. For a moment, I thought she might actually do it. Just walk away. Let the professionals handle it. Then she laughed that broken laugh again. You know what my drill instructor used to say? He said humans are the only species dumb enough to charge into fire because someone told them not to. Said it was our worst trait and our best weapon. She stepped into the open, weapon lowered. The Corventian tensed. He was wrong, though, Kira continued, her voice conversational. It's not that we're dumb. It's that we fundamentally don't give up, ever, even when we should, even when it's smarter to quit. We just keep going because the alternative is worse. Inspiring speech. Still not walking away? Not even a little. The Corventian raised his weapon. Kira was faster. She shot the ground between them, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. While he was blinded, she closed the distance, slid under his next shot, and hit him with a combat move I'd only seen in advanced military training simulations. He went down hard. The last two raiders decided discretion was the better part of not dying. They ran. Kira let them go, too busy checking on the students. She moved through them quickly, efficiently, assessing injuries. A cut here, a bruise there, mostly just shock. Her hands were gentle now, completely different from the violence seconds before. Everyone okay? Her voice had softened, lost that hard edge. Anyone hurt? A young Vrexian student, maybe 13 cycles old, stared at her with wide eyes. You saved us. Kira shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just did what needed doing. Can you walk? Good. Get to the safe zones. Security will be here soon. Back in our shelter, the students watching the feeds were silent. Some looked impressed. Others looked more frightened than before. Principal Velgrish was making a call on his personal comm, probably to every oversight agency in the sector. The doors opened, station security poured in, weapons drawn, looking ready for combat. They found Kira sitting on a cafeteria table, checking her rifle with practiced ease. 5 raiders were secured with their own restraints, groaning but alive. The students were filing out, shaken but unharmed. Hands up, the security chief barked. Drop the weapon. Kira looked at him with an expression of pure exhaustion. Really? I just saved 30 kids, and you're pointing guns at me? Unauthorized use of military-grade weapons. Assault on security personnel. Violation of 3 dozen station regulations. The chief kept his weapon trained on her. You're under arrest. Cool. Can I finish my sandwich first? I missed lunch. They took her to the security office, of course, confiscated her weapons, read her some version of rights that varied depending on which treaty applied. The whole bureaucratic dance. I followed, because this was absolutely going into my thesis, possibly as its own chapter. The interrogation room was standard. Metal table, uncomfortable chairs, recording devices everywhere. Kira sat with her hands folded, looking bored. The security chief, a grizzled Corthan named Brelix, paced in front of her. You knocked out 2 of my guards, he began. Non-lethal nerve strikes. They'll wake up with headaches. Nothing permanent. You accessed a secured weapons locker. Security code was taped under the keypad. Seriously? That's terrible protocol. Brelix slammed his hands on the table. You engaged armed hostiles without authorization. I neutralized a threat to students. Pretty sure that's everyone's authorization. Kira leaned back, utterly calm. Look, Chief, I know you're supposed to be angry right now. It's your job. But how about we skip to the part where you thank me for doing your job better than you could, and I go back to failing algebra? This isn't funny, Miss Vance. Wasn't trying to be funny. I'm trying to figure out why I'm in trouble for stopping people who were literally threatening to kill students if their demands weren't met. She leaned forward now, and her eyes had that predator gleam again. Or would you have preferred I let them hurt kids while we waited for your team to finish getting their armor on? Brelix had no answer for that. The door opened. A woman entered, human, wearing a military uniform I didn't recognize. 3 stars on her collar. High rank. Her face was all sharp angles and hard experience. "I'll take it from here, Chief," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Ma'am, this is a civilian matter. The girl is military. That makes it my jurisdiction." She sat across from Kira, studying her with interest. "Hello, Corporal Vance." "General." Kira's posture had shifted. Not quite attention, but close. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a superior predator. "Heard you had an exciting day." "Been quieter." The general smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. "Epsilon 9 quieter? Or just regular war zone quieter?" "Depends on the day, ma'am." "I read your file. Youngest recipient of the Stellar Cross in 3 decades. 17 confirmed kills, 23 assists. Command recommended you for officer training." "Command can recommend whatever they want. I'm done." The general's smile faded. "You're 18. You signed on until 21. I got discharged. Medical. Psychological discharge doesn't mean you're free, Corporal. It means you're on reserve status pending evaluation." She pulled up a holographic file, scrolling through data. "Says here you've had 4 violent incidents since returning to civilian life. Today makes 5. Today doesn't count. That was legitimate defense. Of strangers, of students you have no obligation to protect." The general leaned closer. "You could have hidden, could have run. Instead, you armed yourself and engaged. That's not the behavior of someone who wants to leave military life behind." Kira's jaw clenched. "That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" The general's voice hardened. 40,000 human soldiers are fighting right now across 12 sectors. They're outnumbered, outgunned, and dying at rates that would make any other species surrender. But we don't surrender, do we? We just keep sending kids like you into the grinder because that's what humans do. I paid my debt. I did my time. There is no time limit on what you are, Corporal. The general stood, pacing now. You think you can come back here, go to classes, pretend to be normal? You're not normal. None of you are. You're weapons that we created. And now you don't fit anywhere. The room went silent. Even through my recording equipment, I could feel the tension. Kira spoke quietly. So what do you want from me? I want you to stop fighting who you are. I want you to accept that maybe, just maybe, being a weapon isn't the worst thing you could be. The general pulled up another file. New conflict brewing in the outer terminus. Separatist movement, heavily armed, targeting civilian stations. We need people who can operate in urban environments, people who can make hard calls, people like you. No. You haven't heard the offer. Don't need to. Answer's no. The general's expression didn't change. Think about it. You've got 72 hours. She headed for the door, then paused. By the way, the students you saved today? 12 of them have already submitted testimony on your behalf. The parents are calling you a hero. Brelix here is getting pressure from the station governor to give you a commendation instead of charges. She left. The door closed with a heavy thunk. Kira sat very still for a long moment. Then she put her head in her hands and just breathed. Brelix cleared his throat. For what it's worth, kid, you did good today. Stupid, reckless, completely against protocol, but good. Am I free to go? Yeah. Try not to break anyone else's bones for at least a week, okay? I followed Kira out of the security office. The station corridors had returned to normal. Students walking to evening classes, vendors selling food, the usual controlled chaos of educational life. But people stared at Kira now, whispered as she passed. Some looked grateful. Others looked afraid. She walked to the same viewing port from earlier, staring out at the stars again. You going to take the general's offer? I asked quietly. I don't know. Her voice was small, tired. Part of me wants to. At least in combat, everything makes sense. You know who the enemy is. You know what success looks like. Here, I'm just lost. You saved 30 lives today, and scared 40 others just by existing. She pressed her forehead against the transparent steel. Rella, can I ask you something? Of course. In all your research, all your interviews with soldiers like me, did any of them figure out how to go back? How to be normal again? I wanted to lie, wanted to give her hope, but academic integrity demanded honesty. No. Most learn to adapt, create new normals, but going back to who they were before, that person's gone. She nodded, like she'd expected that answer. Then maybe the general's right. Maybe fighting is all I'm good for now. Or maybe, I said carefully, you're good at protecting people, and that's worth something, whether it's in a war zone or a school corridor. Kira looked at me, really looked, and for the first time, I saw something other than exhaustion or violence in her eyes. Maybe hope, maybe just consideration. Your thesis, she said. What's it called? The Cost of Youth in Combat, a study of human soldiers and post-war integration. Catchy. What's your conclusion so far? That sending children to war breaks something fundamental in them, but sometimes broken things can still be useful, still be valuable. They just work differently than before. She laughed, genuine this time, not broken. So I'm a useful, broken thing? You're a person who survived hell and came back still trying to do good. That's more than useful. That's extraordinary. The next day, Kira showed up to class, sat in her corner seat, took notes. When Brecken nervously asked if they could partner on a project, she said yes. When Professor Millix assigned reading on human military ethics, she actually contributed to the discussion without threatening anyone. Baby steps. Progress measured in small victories. The general's offer sat unanswered. 72 hours came and went. No response. 3 weeks later, another incident. Fire in the engineering section, students trapped. Kira organized rescue teams, coordinated with emergency services, got everyone out with minimal injuries, made the news feeds, got another commendation. She still had nightmares, still flinched at loud noises, still kept tactical assessments running in the back of her mind. But slowly, day by day, she found ways to channel what the war made her into something productive, something helpful. Maybe she'd never be normal. Maybe that person died on Epsilon 9 along with 40% of her unit. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the galaxy needed people like Kira Vance, broken and dangerous and absolutely unwilling to let innocent people get hurt on her watch. 6 months later, I submitted my thesis. Kira Vance featured prominently in Chapter 7, titled, When Weapons Learn to Heal. It was controversial. Some academics called it too sympathetic. Others said it didn't go far enough in condemning the practice of youth recruitment. But the soldiers who read it understood. Kira graduated 2 years later, top of her class in emergency response and crisis management. She didn't go back to the military. Instead, she joined civilian rescue operations, pulling people out of disasters across the sector. Last I heard, she'd saved over 200 lives. Still had nightmares. Still struggled with crowds and unexpected touches. But she'd found her place. Found a way to be the weapon the war made her, without having to kill anyone. And that, I suppose, is as close to a happy ending as soldiers like her get. Some people are forged in fire and never quite cool down. The trick is finding a way to burn without destroying everything around you. Kira figured it out. Not perfectly, not easily, but she figured it out. They sent her to war at 16. She came back a weapon. And then, slowly, painfully, she learned to aim herself at saving people instead of killing them. Not redemption exactly, more like repurposing. And sometimes, that's enough.